It's day 10 of the Global Chess League with former world champion Magnus Carlsen back in action. And the big question is, how is he going to recover from that horrible blunder he made yesterday in his game with Levon Aronian? Just something very unusual thing happened in which Magnus just blundered mate. That's something you rarely see him doing it. And well, the good thing is that he gets another chance today. With the white pieces, he's playing against Polish #1 Jan-Krzysztof Duda, and that's a good news for him because Duda is a really fighting player. That means you will get chances. Of course, there's always some risk involved, but Duda is not the kind of guy who's just gonna sit and wait. And that's exactly what's gonna happen in this game. As Magnus opens with one e4 and Duda plays the Sicilian. Knight f3, d6, and now interesting moment. Normally, you go for the open Sicilian with the move d4, or just play an anti-Sicilian, for instance, with bishop b5. Magnus kind of delays his decision, plays here the move knight c3 first, black goes knight f6, and Magnus plays here bishop e2. This is a kind of a weird move, but basically he's saying, I'm not going to reveal my intentions yet, what I'm going to do with the d-pawn. Knight c6 played, and now, only now, the move d4 on the board. And it's kind of a tricky move order, because by forcing, not really forcing, but by letting black play the move knight c6, you cannot longer get any sort of a Najdorf structure, whereas normally the pawn is on a6. So we get a similar type of structure after the move e5. The knight on d4 is kicked away, but it's not exactly the same. This is the classical variation of the Sicilian. There's a lot of theory. It's quite a positional line, used to be popular back in the 80s and early 90s. And it's not the sort of game maybe Duda was really hoping for to get. h6, you may think, what is that move? Well, it's all about this d5 square. And white normally wants to get its bishop to g5 to trade off the bishop for the knight and gain control over the d5 square. Black prevents it by keeping that knight on f6 and preventing the move bishop g5 with h6. So white is going to castle, bishop e7, rook e1, also a modest developing move, but very typical. After castling, the bishop is going to drop back to f1. Maybe not the most exciting sort of attacking game you would expect, but very sound positional chess. The rook overprotecting the pawn on e4. The bishop is waiting on distance, seeing what it can be doing in the next couple of moves. And black is also gonna wait here. Played here the move rook e8 with same idea, just to drop back with the bishop to f8 very soon. h3, also white prevents black from ever getting in the move bishop g4, which could have been considered still on the previous move, but okay, that didn't happen. Bishop f8, and now what is white going to do with his dark squared bishop? That's the main question. Well, b3 looks kind of unusual, but I quite like it to place the bishop on this diagonal. Black goes a6, bishop b2, and here black goes for the move b5. A very typical Sicilian move, so that you're planning to develop your bishop to the long diagonal, potentially exerting pressure against the pawn on e4. b5, b4 can be played to kick the knight away, so all very thematical. White goes queen d2, and now interesting moment, as this particular position has still been reached even in a few Grandmasters games years ago. And in all of these games, black played here the most natural move, bishop b7. You would like to get your bishop into play to connect the major pieces. Who knows, the rook can come to the half open c-file. So this is very logical, but in hindsight, and we will exactly get to see why this move is not so precise. What should black have done instead? Well, something like knight e7 may look completely bizarre, but the idea is to get the knight over to g6, from where it can go to f4, maybe later the bishop can go to b7, but there are some reasons to postpone the development of your queen's bishop. So let's have a look. Bishop b7 played, and now a novelty by Magnus Carlsen, as he played here the move knight to d5. Very nice move. In a lot of cases, white is not going to jump in with its knight to the d5 square, rather tries to retain control over that square with a piece. But now, after knight takes d5, white's idea is to recapture with the e-pawn. So he no longer occupies the weak square with a piece but with a pawn. And the reason why he's doing it right now, okay, you're attacking the knight on c6, so the knight gotta go away. It went to e7, so that you're attacking the pawn on d5 twice. But now white plays the move c4. This is exactly white's idea. You do get a fantastic pawn chain, and this bishop on b7 is out of play. That's the reason the bishop could probably better have been still on c8, so that it could have gone to f5, for instance. Queen d7 played, and now, okay, white has already made some progress on the queen side by challenging the pawn on b5, but the pawn is now pretty well defended by black as well. But what are both sides really planning to do? White's going to play on the queen side, black has an extra pawn on the other side of the board, the pawn on e5, and normally you're looking for ways to expand on that king side, but things are not that simple because of the rook on e1. You're controlling the e4 square, and I think white is just faster obtaining counterplay on the queen side. So white played here the move a4. I think this is a very nice positionally sound move, trying to open up the files, and when the files are opened, then black doesn't get a chance to change directions. He should focus what's happening on that side of the board. So white is quite fast now. B takes c4, and now b takes c4. Excellent move. This pawn, it's not really a weakness. It's well supported by the bishop, so black cannot really try to attack it. And I think it's quite beneficial to white to have an open file already. So in certain cases, you can start thinking about doubling the rooks, try to infiltrate with your rooks on that side of the board. Whereas, what can black do? Well, black can try to generate some play on the king side. Played here the move knight g6, but I think black's play is way too slow. Now you would like to use your rook, but the queen on d7 is still eyeing the pawn on a4. So white plays a5. Very nice technical move. So the rook no longer has a defensive duty, and the pawn also fixes the pawn on a6. So potentially that pawn on a6, if it will be targeted by, for instance, this bishop on f1 or a rook coming into b6, that's going to be a serious weakness for black to deal with. Black played rook ac8, and now the bishop goes to a3. Also very nice move, keeping an eye on that backward pawn on d6. Not that you can win the pawn immediately, but once again, with ideas like rook b1, rook b6, you can definitely increase the pressure, and that will restrict the mobility of black's forces. Now, black played, in search for counterplay, the move e4. You may think, okay, he may have also considered f5, but after f5, the question is, okay, what is black going to do? Well, most naturally, e4 is going to come, and, well, having the pawn on f5, it really seriously weakens the e6 square. So I think there's absolutely no need playing f5. e4 is probably the right way of playing, but frankly speaking, I think that after knight d4, white has a very promising position, as I fail to see what black is exactly trying to do. Even if he would be able to make some additional moves on the king side, white is rock solid with his bishop on f1, guarding the pawn on c4, but also covering some valuable squares on the king side. Black played here the move knight to e5, attacking the pawn on c4. So you don't really want to take on e4, as that does allow knight takes c4, and the exchange of these pawns definitely helps black to improve the bishop on b7, as the bishop is now targeting the pawn on d5. So there's no need to do that. What can be done instead? Well, protecting the pawn on c4 makes a lot of sense. So rook ac1 was played in the game. Duda played queen a4, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn on c4 one more time. So the pawn is 3 times attacked. White got to do something about both problems, and Magnus played very solid move, bishop to b4. I really like this move, and the question is, what is the queen going to do on a4? Now, also, I've still struggled to see what black is going to do next, not only with the queen, but also with the other pieces. Bishop on b7, bishop on f8, they're not making a great impression at all. White is having a nice space advantage. One idea I was looking at, and it was not played in the game, is the move rook c7, intending rook ec8 to attack the pawn on c4 one more time. But that runs, and I'm pretty sure Magnus had seen it, into the move knight to b5. Beautiful idea, attacking the rook. Now you think you can take the knight, of course, but there's rook a1 attacking the queen, and this queen is no longer able to drop back because of that pawn on b5. That was the idea of the knight sacrifice. After queen to b3, there is rook e3, and the queen is just trapped. So this is a nice tactical idea, very typical, of course. So that black is not able to intensify the pressure against the pawn on c4. Instead, there followed the move knight to d3. Attacking both rooks, so white's gonna whip off that knight, bishop takes, e takes, and now obviously you should not get tempted by taking the pawn as the bishop on b4 is unprotected. So we don't do that, and well, what are we going to do instead? We may trade off rooks on e8, but Magnus had a better idea. He thought, I need my rooks on the back rank, I keep them on the board, so that whenever it's needed, I can play the move rook a1, and this rook does support the other rook. So very nice technical move, avoiding the exchange of rooks. And if black is going to play a random move here, let's say for instance a move like g6, white's going to play rook a1, exactly what we were hoping for, and then after queen d7, finally that pawn on d3 can be eliminated, and white is just a very big pawn up. Instead of g6, there followed the move rook c7, so black is still contemplating some counterplay against the pawn on c4, and rook a1 could be a possibility, was not played in the game. The reason why Magnus didn't go for this idea is that now after queen d7, queen takes d3, black is pretty fast generating counterplay against the pawn on c4, thanks to these rooks. If you protect the pawn with rook a to c1, there is bishop takes d5, black regains the pawn as c takes d5 runs into rook takes c1, losing material. So this was a clever idea by Duda, but Magnus sees all these fantastic tactics and is not in a rush, played here the move knight f5 instead, intending to win the pawn on d6 given a chance. And of course, if let's say the queen is going back to defend the pawn, attack the knight, there is queen takes d3, white's the pawn up and protects the knight at the same time. So that doesn't work. Other moves, something like rook e2 could be very tempting. Attacking the queen, trying to deflect the queen from protecting the bishop, but after queen takes d3, the rook is also hanging. So that doesn't really help. One other very tricky line was probably also calculated by the top stars is the move rook ec8, giving up the pawn on d6, but after bishop takes d6, there is rook takes c4, rook takes, queen takes c4. Now you take the bishop on f8, king takes f8. Looks as if the smoke has cleared and black has managed to open up the position, escaping into a playable position. But there is this move, queen b2, with a beautiful attack against the pawn on g7 as well as the bishop on b7. And that's how black's position is about to collapse. So thanks to this move, knight f5, there are potential problems related to the pawn on d6 as well as the pawn on g7. Therefore, black instead played here the move bishop to c8, attacking that knight. The knight goes back to e3, overprotecting the pawn on c4, and still we do have these plans of going rook a1, kick the queen out, and pick up the pawn on d3. Now I believe this is basically the last chance for black to stay in the game, but black started to drift here a bit by giving up the exchange. He didn't want to lose the pawn on d3 for free. Instead, maybe a move like f5 may have been considered. So after rook a1, queen goes away, queen takes d3, you can play the move f4, kick the knight out, knight goes back to f1, and now with a move like queen f5, okay, you're a pawn down, but you're fighting here. You're trying to exchange queens so that you have ideas of regaining the pawn on c4. That is probably the best chance for black. But in the game there followed rook takes e3, as I said. And this is a tricky move, because if you take with the queen, then your bishop is hanging. It's two bishops versus a rook. That's something you should definitely not allow. If you take with the f-pawn, there is bishop f5, and it will be very difficult to get rid of that pawn on d3. Black may even consider just installing the bishop on e4, and definitely there is compensation for the exchange sacrifice. However, Magnus, having everything under control, plays first in between move, rook to a1, trying to deflect the queen. If the queen goes away, for instance to d7, only now we take the pawn, oh sorry, we take the rook on e3, and after that we take the pawn on d3, of course. So black instead played here the move queen b3, trying to stay in touch with the bishop on b4, so queen takes e3 is not possible yet. First rook a to b1, so you're attacking the queen, indirectly protecting the bishop as well. Queen takes c4, and only now we take with the queen on e3. And we are about to win the pawn on d3 as well. Black played bishop f5, trying to stick to that pawn. Should mention also that queen takes d5 is just not looking great because of rook takes d3. Just capturing that pawn with your rook, attacking the queen, as queen takes d3 would actually be a serious mistake, allowing the exchange of queens, and then the rooks are standing in the same diagonal, which means that black regains material with the help of a skewer. But as said, rook takes d3 is absolutely fine. Therefore, black really tries to stick to the pawn on d3 with bishop f5, rook bc1, attacking the queen. If you take on b4, there is a rook takes c7, and this position should just be really bad. The d-pawn is not dangerous at all. Instead, queen b3 was played so that after rook takes c7, instead of capturing the bishop, you can take the rook on d1 with check, king to h2, king is absolutely safe there, queen b3 attacking the bishop, but now queen d4. I love this move. As you protect the bishop, you retain control over the d2 square, so the d-pawn can never be pushed anytime soon. Queen a4, pinning the bishop on b4, and now once again we should not get tempted by trying to solve the pin and go for the exchange of queens, because then the d-pawn is unstoppable. Instead, Magnus is doing absolutely fine, wants to get his rook to the back rank to pin this bishop. Played here the move rook a7, as rook c8 was not possible because of bishop takes. Now you have a big problem as black. You cannot really get out of a potential pin on the back rank. If you go away with the king, it's rook takes f7. Black's position falls apart. Instead, bishop g6 is possible, but then rook a8 is a great move, and you're pinning the bishop, and you have a serious threat. If, let's say, black plays a random move, you take on f8, sacrifice the rook, and the bishop takes d6 with check, and on the next move, you just take the queen. That's it. Instead, therefore, queen d7 was played. The queen comes back into defense, but now the white queen is joining as well. This bishop still covers the path of the black d-pawn. And one typical move here, typical idea, is to play queen b8, pinning the bishop one more time, followed by bishop takes d6. That's going to be absolutely crushing. Queen f5 was played, and now black is hoping for counterplay, but that's not going to work. There is beautiful tactic, rook takes f8 with the point that if you take, it's going to be queen d8 with checkmate. The rook can therefore not be taken. Duda played king h7, but now you're a full rook down, and just be careful, there's not something like a perpetual somehow. Queen d4 was played, the queen is back in business, covering a check on f4, dealing with the d-pawn as well. That's a rook, that's simply too much, and therefore Duda resigned at this point. I thought this was a very instructive positional masterpiece by Magnus Carlsen. And remember this idea in the Sicilian, when you get this pawn on d5, this bishop on b7 is a problematic piece. Actually, not only the bishop was in trouble, basically all blacks, especially the minor pieces, but also the major pieces, were unable to find a way to join the game in an effective manner. So I'm very impressed by this game. I hope you really liked it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate all the support, and then we will be back with more coverage of exciting chess. See you soon.